And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the monastery, the open bar of the internet, the world's greatest shit show, and the place where we, the good brothers and sisters of this most holy of temples, seek enlightenment through the drunkest, craziest, and most batshit ways possible. I am your one and only gaming monk, better known as Mildra, and with me, I have a returning good brother to the temple, coming to us from the wonderful world of Hoodwinked, previously here for stuff like Starset or the first iteration of Play Easily Now in its war game form. Now coming back with the second edition of what was previously Basic and Generic, now rechristened Play Easily Now, the role-playing game. The one and only Josiah Mork. How you doing today, man? So, I suppose I think I got the basics right. This is what would have otherwise been the second edition of Basic and Generic, but since that name got retired with the war game and go for Play Easily Now, it carried over. So, I suppose the obvious question I can ask is, Were you always planning, even before the name change, to do a second edition of Basic and Generic? Yeah, I can certainly get that, and I do recall with the run of Bag there was one, and hang on a moment. Sorry about that. There was a bit of an audio issue, so I'm gonna need you to repeat the question because apparently OBS decided to be an idiot.
Oh no. Need me to go in?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah, so I was planning to do a second edition almost from as soon as the game came out. Which I know that sounds really bad to say, but there were ideas that I really wanted to pack into it of mechanics that, you know, it seemed like there'd be really great and fun gameplay to be had in them, but I didn't want to overcomplicate the game, and I wasn't sure how they would interact, and I wanted it to be this really entry-level, really accessible system. But even from when you and I first talked way back in 2019 or 2020, I was thinking like about how I could incorporate those mechanics in, and then having these last 4 years to really hear back from players on where it was really accessible and maybe where they were kind of looking for some more meat on it, I was able to kind of fine-tune things, fix things up, and then figure out how those new mechanics would fit in. And that just really lended itself well to this new second edition, which, like you said, we've rebranded to Pen or Play Easily Now.
I'm still waiting on the Zine expansion called Pen Pals.
One of my friends had a similar joke. They said we need to include a bag edition of it as a little like throwback to the original title. That's just a little like 6x9 copy of it you can fit in your book bag.
Yeah. Well, if you were still using the bag name, it would have said the Zine expansion should be called Grab Bags.
Oh, that's clever. I'm gonna have to steal that from you at some point. But I like the pen pals. If we do an expansion in zine form, we'll have to give that a try. I'm still playing around with expansion ideas. I'll have to run that question by you at some point, but I digress.
I do remember you did make a setting book during the bag era.
Yo, we got 2 of them actually.
Yeah. And I suppose this is where I can go into one of the bigger elephants in the room that's decided to crash on my couch. Everything is conversion. I'm guessing with this second edition, you're going to be putting in some conversion tips for bringing bag into pen.
Yeah. So I tried to keep the system as similar and conducive as possible in its original form. And pretty much everything is going to be able to work the same way. All the skills are the same. All of the bonuses for, your items or whatnot are, if not exactly the same, they're very similar. But the core resolution mechanic has actually changed. So instead of doing a D10 over under system where you're trying to roll under your skill but not over it, and that's still as high as you can within your skill, that was still a little bit too complicated for new players, and it kind of set a skill ceiling that didn't feel very dynamic and stuff. So instead, the new system uses 3d6, roll those, and then you add your skill to it, and then you add any bonuses from your weapons. And then if you roll a certain amount, then you succeed. If you roll over that, you get a bonus on your next roll, and if you roll under that, you either fail or you can take a penalty on your next roll but succeed. And so the resolution mechanic has changed, but all of the content in terms of weapons, bonuses, characteristics, NPCs, all have the same stat sheets. So everything should cleanly transfer over from the first edition to the second.
Yeah, and when it comes to the degrees of success that you have with the concepts, because of the fact that you have what essentially amounts to a universal table not far removed from Powered by the Apocalypse or the Omni system, which I just talked about an hour ago. It sounds to me that the main thing that it changed is how you'd handle the various modifiers, especially since if I'm getting this right, the difficulty of an action would be a straight modifier to that 3d6 roll.
The difficulty, yeah, it's a either a modifier because of a circumstantial condition, or because of the relative difficulty of a spell, something like that. Or the DM can also set a required amount of success. So maybe instead of a normal success that you would need to achieve what you want, you need a critical or even a heroic success in order to achieve the action. And then there's also an emphasis, we have a little section there too on competing roles and how important those are, because oftentimes, a trap has been set to a certain degree, or you're working against somebody else's efforts, or what have you. And so at that point, you might roll a success and successfully, look at the stone wall and inspect it well because you're an investigating character, but it might not be well enough to see whatever it is that they've hidden previously. And so it kind of gives the DM some options there, whether they want to set a particular level of success, whether they want to be competing against another NPC's role or character's role. There are some options there.
Now, the for lack of a better word, rollover modifier that is in that degrees of success table is certainly a novel approach, and I'm curious what prompted that idea. Because a lot of success tables work on this kind of way, but it's usually a yes and or no and or yes but and no but. And that's not exactly what's being done here.
Yeah, it really comes down to the heart behind the game, which was making it something that's easy for people who haven't played this type of game before to grasp. And so I wanted to have a clear mechanical benefit so that they could understand, you've gotten something extra out of this situation. This is how it helps your character, especially because it's in that first module, and they might be more comfortable or familiar with kind of a board gamey, mechanic-y situation than as much a storytelling situation. But I also found that there are a lot of situations, whether it's in Dungeons and Dragons, or you've probably heard me fanboy over Wrath and Glory because I'm a Warhammer 40k fan. But they do a similar thing where you roll extra, and so you get a critical. There's a special bonus to it, but it feels like that can kind of fall flat sometimes when like the DM doesn't have something super great planned, or maybe it's a role that's kind of arbitrary or small, and so there's not really a whole lot to be gained from doing extra good on it. So I wanted it always to be something that you could be excited about, that you knew you were going to do better on. And then it kind of combos in well with, maneuvers or spells or whatever, where you can take a more powerful action next turn, or maybe take an action that you would have a harder time taking otherwise, and kind of combo together into play to your character's strengths or minimize their weaknesses. So it just gave more flavor, I guess, and it was more approachable, and it allowed for some of those more interesting character interactions.
Yeah. Now, in the demo, you have a set of archetypes, and one of the things, and each of them have their own particular features. Within the full book, is that going to be central to how character creation works, or is it going to be a bit more freeform?
Oh, it's totally freeform. Yeah, totally freeform. So to create a character, or to start off, I just wanted to make the game, as easy as possible. And so I figured, or for those of you who are listening who aren't familiar, the game's written in modules. So there's 5 modules that you learn the whole game over the course of. But the idea is you only have to learn the first 7 pages in order to start playing, which is module 1. But in order to kind of overcome the hurdle of character creation and all of the decisions and all of the things that get baked into that can really pull people out of the immersion. And it can, for someone who's just getting started, that can be a big time commitment, or a lot of decisions that they might not know that they want to make until they've played the game. And so that first module is just the core rules, and it's kind of a quick start. You get 6 or 7 pre-built characters that you get to pick from. And they're kind of examples, like you said, archetypes of how you can play different play styles. But all they're composed of is skill levels and perks and quirks, which are the pros and the cons of your character, and items. But once you move past that first module, then the second module, you get to create your own character. And we have, I think, over 80 characteristics, perks, and quirks for you to pick from. And you can assign your skills completely freeform. So at that point, once you've moved to module 2, it's entirely open-ended to build any archetype or build your own.
Yeah, when I look within each of the archetypes, the main thing that I end up seeing as far as how they're personalized is the list of perks and quirks going on minor, medium, and major. Is it a case where you'd be picking the full range in full character creation? Would you be picking the full range of quirks from the word go, or is it a case where you'd be expanding the perks and quirks as you develop?
You do expand as you develop. The ones that are on the archetypes, those 7 starting archetypes, you pick that many to get started, or you can pick up to that many. The rules make a point to say that you don't have to pick all of them. But if you want to, then you will pick as many as you want your character to start with. And then as you play and as you level up, you'll have the option to either remove quirks, which are the negative parts of your character, as it's thematically appropriate, or you can add in perks, and with each module to reflect the new mechanics that get introduced, you get a new character sheet that kind of expands on it, and with those new character sheets you get room to add in those new perks.
Yeah. Now given that, this is where we get to one of the other elephants in the room when dealing with a universalist game.
Mhm.
And that is the fact that there's always a risk of analysis paralysis with universalist or
Mhm.
multi-genre types of games. So when it comes to that, even if they're not full on archetypes, do you plan on putting in some guidance as far as what would be good perks to go with depending on what sort of approach someone wants to take?
I tried to kind of build the starting archetypes that way, and included with the 7 character pre-built characters are kind of explanations of why they're built the way they are. So you have like the alchemist who's really intended to kind of be good with items and doesn't move super fast but can craft and is set up well for kind of being a support character. And then you have the brawler, the combatant
Mm-hmm.
who's, your classic fighter or barbarian type, and you've got a healer and you've got a Cenobite who's kind of your monk, but like a monk fighter hybrid kind of. You have a wanderer who's kind of your ranger type, or they also have like some healing capabilities and stuff. So I tried to just do slight deviations on kind of the stereotype classes, if you will, to give people kind of a baseline of, if that's what you're going for, if that's what you have in mind, then these are good starting places, and then people can kind of switch them around as they like. But beyond those, we leave it pretty open ended, just to hopefully encourage people that, you know, if you really, really want to play one of those archetypes, you can, and this is a good starting point. But at least me personally, and a lot of the people that I've played with, some of the most fun is just coming up with those unexpected combinations of abilities, and leaving it freeform helps kind of people see those connections where they might otherwise kind of pigeonhole themselves with the typical classes.
Mm-hmm. I can get that, and the same thing applies with spellcasting, because spellcasting, depending on the type of setting that one is going with, can go in a lot of different ways. And
Mm-hmm.
just to consider an example, the type of spellcasting that would be in, say, Mistborn is not the same type of magic system that you'd see in, say, the Wheel of Time. Just use those
Right.
two examples in a straight fantasy setup, and that's not
Mm-hmm.
even getting into cases where the line between martial and magic is not as clear cut, like in a lot of wuxia works.
Mm-hmm. Or
So
even like in Lord of the Rings, like you can tell magic's being used, but it's not like a D&D spell.
yeah, the Decipher Lord of the Rings RPG had the best explanation by referring to a subtle magic that's everywhere but isn't something that is used. So even something as
Mm.
mundane as using the name of the Valar is has a magical effect, or
Hmm.
why you don't say the name of Sauron, or try and read the text on the One Ring, because that might get the
Mm.
attention of Sauron's forces. That kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, it was something. Then again, the Decipher version was written in part by Stephen Long, who is not too far removed from either of us, because he will find ways to bend the rules. I had talked with him before, and he had mentioned how, for some bizarre reason, stuff from the appendices and the Silmarillion he couldn't use.
Oh no.
And he had a whole thing written about gray elves until he was told to stop. But he still snuck some
Oh.
stuff in like spell descriptions, just to see if they were actually checking. 'Cause you know how it is. Bend the rules instead of break them.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Gotta
But
push your chances, I suppose.
where this ties into spellcasting in Pen would there be a way for different types of magic systems to be represented within
I think so. Because really, what the magic system that pen represents is more just, I would say, like, extra martial abilities, if that makes sense. So if you want to run kind of a superheroes type game, you could represent their superpowers as spells. Or if you wanted to run, a psionics or something, you could do that. We had one player who his character was like a general, kind of like a Astra Militarum kind of oh, what's the word I'm looking for? Leader. Commissar, yes, that's the word. Thank you. And so he used magic not as like a spellcaster or a psyker, but he would cast a spell, air quotes, that like called down like meteors basically. And his flavor for that was that a basilisk was firing artillery on his command down on different positions. And so you can really flavor it however you want to. It would just be the effect would resolve the same way. It would just be the explanation that would change.
Yeah, and calling in an artillery strike is always a viable option.
Oh yeah, especially when you're Astra Militarum.
And since you brought up, since it's leaning into Commissar, you could easily have the intimidation factor be a spell in and of itself, because the guard isn't scared of what's in front of them; they're scared of what's behind them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so true.
Especially since if I want to be pedantic, I could bring up how technically commissars aren't part of the regular chain of command, except with weird exceptions like Ibram Gaunt. Which is why there's a bit of friction between them and the rest of the guard.
I actually didn't know that.
It's complicated. It has to do with the way the labyrinth of chain of command works. Commissars are usually treated as advisors with a lot of political pull, but still advisors. They're not in the direct chain of command of a given regiment or the like, which means because of that, the commander in the chain of command of that regiment cannot give a commissar orders. Much like how, say, Astartes have a degree of independence when it comes to joint actions.
Mm-hmm.
Even though they're part of the Imperial military, they're independent from it. It's
interesting.
I guess if there is a real-world example, I'd say it's the difference between commissioned and non-commissioned officers, although that's a vast simplification on the matter. But the reason why I say Ibram Gaunt is a weird case is because he is both a commissar and the head of an Astra Militarum unit.
Oh,
which
interesting.
Ends up creating a whole lot of complications politically.
I'm sure.
As well as the fact that other officers really don't like him.
It seems to be the case of a lot of Warhammer characters.
It very much is. Obviously, I'm massively simplifying. A lot of the stuff with Ibram Gaunt comes from things like the Savage Worlds Crusade books, and as well as the whole Gaunt's Ghosts thing, which is still ongoing, I think. Then again, I was infamous for abusing the rules when it came to Ussakar Creed and having stealth tanks show up. You just turn a corner and there's a Bane Blade that's about to shoot at you. Or, in some cases, a Terminus pattern Land Raider, which is them saying, let's take a Land Raider and let's put as many las cannons as we can fit on it.
As you should.
I mean, yes, there's the risk of overheating and blowing the thing up, but you've got to roll nothing but ones. Which is like a 1 in 1,200 chance of doing. Somebody's
pretty good odds.
somebody's probably done it, and to that person, I would tell them to go to the nearest exorcist and have their dice blessed.
Oof, can't imagine. I had that once with Custodes. I was rolling 5, 3-up saves, and I rolled 5 ones. They died to las guns.
That's embarrassing.
It was really sad. It was really sad.
But when it comes to spellcasting, it looks like it is effect-based. You know, the combination of elements and effects. So,
Yep.
Would it be fair to say that your choice of element determines what skill you're using? I.e., there isn't really a MP or a spell charge thing. It is just another way of using attributes and skills.
It's more so the effect that you gain, or the effect that you choose, does correlate to certain abilities. So like if you want to improve another character's toughness, or not toughness, that's not a strat, I mean, it's still in 40k mode, resistance, then yeah, you'll choose like a certain I think it's ability or effect, one of the two. I think it's ability or element, like you said. But it also correlates then to, if you want to burn something or versus have it broadcast light, then you would cast, choose the element that only would affect it in that one way. So it might burn with a ghost flame that doesn't actually give off any light, or it might burn that casts light, but it doesn't actually consume the object. And so it kind of has the one-dimensional impact based on the effect that you choose. But yeah, it does also correlate to skills if you want to like strengthen somebody's skills.
Yeah. Now, given that, would there be another aspect regarding how many people are affected by a given spell effect? Like if it's a cone shape, if it's a single target, that kind of thing. I didn't lose you, Josiah, did you? Did I? Hold on a moment, folks. I think we may have suffered the wrath of... Oh, are you back?
Oh, I think I'm back. I don't know what happened.
Yeah, you went silent for a few seconds. I was thinking that either Discord or something else got us. But...
Oh, no. Thankfully we're back. Whew. I don't know what happened there. Sorry about that.
But what I was asking is would there be a factor involved with the area of effect of a given spell? Like, would there be something some kind of modifier if it's like a cone, or if it's a single target direct thing, or some sort of AoE, that kind of thing?
Yep. So when you're casting a spell, you get to choose a number of different factors. So you choose the element involved, the action that it's going to take, whether it's magnifying, conjuring, moving, strengthening, reducing, all of those different... I think there are 6 or 7 options there. And then you choose the duration that it's going to last, and you choose the distance away you are from the target, and then you choose the number of targets or the size of the area. And each of those contribute a different modifier. Obviously, the farther away, the more targets, etc., the bigger the penalty. And then those all kind of play into the potential of the spell when you roll to cast it.
Yeah, I can certainly get that. And with that in mind, since it's still using that degree of success approach, is there any additional effect if you get one of the failures? I know in the example given it showed what the effect might be for a success, a critical or heroic success, but is there the opposite case, like have some sort of casting backlash?
There isn't, and honestly, I didn't give it a whole lot of thought. Now that you say that, I think that could be kind of cool. But there is a degree of unpredictability to the magic already, where if you just succeed, like if you are trying to animate something, for example, and you only succeed, then it moves kind of chaotically, and so you may or may not get the result that you want, versus critically succeeding that gives you more or less the result, and then heroically succeeding where you can do exactly what you want. And so I guess I didn't think to include the negative side of maybe it like hurting you or doing something wrong, but also I wouldn't want to dissuade people too much from spell casting because there's already an air of unpredictability with the success. So it's not something I really dug into, but it might be a fun thing to tinker with.
Think of it as the equivalent of, say, Perils of the Warp, just not as dickish.
Yeah, no, it's true. And even if there was like only a particular degree of it, like Perils, where if you rolled like 2 1s or 3 1s or something, and something really bad happened, that could be really cool.
Yeah. I think it would be something that would be dependent on the kind of setting, because if you're dealing with a setting where magic is gonna be very common and reliable, i.e., something like Key, or even something like the Force, it wouldn't do to have it there. But in something like say Warhammer Fantasy, where magic is not far removed from handling radioactive material, and same thing with Psychers and 40k. There it might be a little bit more on point to do so. I mean, just look at, say, the Weird Boys when it comes to the Orc, who can command phenomenal power, but have the unfortunate risk of a bad case of explosions.
Yeah, just going pop. But hey, I mean, we have an open license too, so if anybody wants to get a copy of Pen and build your 40k alternative or your whatever and kind of bake that in, by all means, I think that would be super cool. I was looking at kind of Arthurian lore too, where there's a lot of like blood magic and sacrifice and stuff. I personally, just because of my faith and stuff, don't bake that in so that you have to play with that, because that makes me a little bit uncomfortable. But if there is something that someone wanted to create with a particular setting in mind, the system would translate very easily to a more, grim, dark fantasy, whatever setting where there were more consequences or added components and stuff. And anyone's free to create that setting with our license.
Yeah. That's why I said some sort of setting focused option, because I've hinted at this elsewhere, but I've gotten very frustrated with certain games that claim that they can be used for all kinds of fantasy, but very clearly skew towards one, and treat their magic system as a one-size-fits-all. The games that claim, you can use this to run all kinds of fantasy, but very clearly skew towards Western Europe. Don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with skewing that way, but as the saying goes, don't piss on my head and tell me it's raining.
Well, I'm curious then, how do we do in terms of that, in your opinion?
I would say and maybe this is something that can be addressed in the full book, but I think it should be made a bit more clear how important spell elements are. Like what would be the deciding factor in that, or is it something that's more of a flavor thing? And perhaps this is something that you can put under consideration for the full book, but the concept of what elements can and can't be used depending on what sort of what sort of magic system someone's using is something to be in consideration. Like, consider the different types of bending with Avatar. There's a bunch of different stuff you can do as say a waterbender, but you're not going to all of a sudden do fire bending unless you're the Avatar.
Interesting. So making it more like exclusive to kind of highlight the importance of elements.
Yeah, it's more of using that element system as a starting point to have different spells, have different magic systems represented, especially when you're dealing with the universalist game. That's just something I would take under consideration, since with some of the magic systems I mentioned earlier, there's not a whole lot that they have in common with each other. And certainly some of the magic systems I've come up with on the Geek Watch podcast are going to be just as applicable. Now, that also brings me to maneuvers, which I'm glad that this is present, because anyone who's watched this channel for long enough will know about my endless bitching about how martial characters get the short end of the stick in a lot of games.
It's true. I did this just for you. I'd want you to know that. Because I remembered we talked on our very first conversation in Bag going through the system, and you were like, man, you need something for martial characters because it feels like they're left out here. And ever since 2020, I've been thinking about that conversation and cooking on the maneuvers.
I'm glad I was able to help in some form.
Oh yeah.
But it's something that I've had that has been a burr up my ass since my earliest days playing when I was a little kid. And because, the analogy that I often use is, say somebody is a big fan of, let's go with Pirates of the Caribbean, and they want to make a character that's doing swordplay not too far removed from the swashbuckling in that movie. And imagine how deflating it is when all of their setup about positioning, footwork, parries, riposte, all of the stuff you hear in your first few lessons in fencing get reduced to basic attack.
Very lackluster.
Yeah, it just I know some people will say, well, you can just roleplay all that stuff, but when you get the same result, regardless of how much you're role-playing, the reason to do it is not as clear. I.e., if I'm going to be doing that same basic attack at the end of the day, what's the damn point?
Exactly, and it's not like you can role-play that you're, doing all these flourishes and footwork, and then you roll to hit and you roll terribly and miss. It's like, well, okay, I'm not going to role play if there's a chance of doing that badly or it all not mattering at all.
And it's the not mattering thing that's kind of the thing. There's also the fact that a lot of times martial characters are treated as Babby's first character.
Yeah, like the human fighter is everybody's first D&D character.
Or doing it because it's the choice of the simple, the person who's coming in to play but doesn't want to do a whole lot of thinking.
Exactly.
And even in something like D&D, more recently I've seen people say, well, you get multi attacks. I'm like, whoopee, more basic attack.
Yeah, you're still just rolling the same, just more times and hopefully doing damage. Like, there's nothing compelling about it.
So with the maneuvers that we have here, it looks like you have several of the ones I kind of hinted at, but it also looks like you have something of a weapon class system. What is that about?
So that's just kind of, there's different sets of weapon classes basically, and the only thing that those really matter or play into is what maneuvers you can take with the weapons that you have equipped. Because, you know, with a shield, you're not really going to be, you know, leaping to hit somebody with it, right? But you might shove them with it, or you might be able to, I can't think of what the other ones are off the top of my head, but there are some that, you know, it lends itself to and some that it doesn't. And so for each weapon class, I think they give you the option of 2 or 3 different combat maneuvers, and so those kind of emphasize the style of combat that might come with them. So with an axe, you know, you're going to be doing more leaping attacks, slashing, like sweeping arcs, whatever, whereas with like a whip, you'll be more disarming people or distracting people, things like that are more nuanced and more like panache. And so it's a little bit flavorful, but it also just kind of adds some mechanical impact to why you would pick an axe over a sword.
Mm-hmm. Which is a fair thing to do, and I'm glad that the difference between an axe or a sword or a spear is present here, since that's another aspect that a lot of people skim.
Mm-hmm.
And
it creates some fun encounters because in the system, each item has a breakability, and the only time you have to roll to see if it breaks is if you roll like a critical or a heroic hit with it. And so if you do one of the things that, like an axe, you can leap and potentially get a bonus or do extra stuff with it. Well, if you do that and it creates a critical hit, well then you have a higher chance of breaking your weapon. And so it kind of creates a cool moment of cost and benefit analysis too, of like, if I leap with my axe to do a heavy hit, I might also break it. And so it lends itself in that way too, to kind of the pros and the cons of the weapons.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the closest I saw to something like that was this work both ways bonus that was in the version of the Dark Eye that I had, where a reach weapon could have a bonus, but that bonus could also work against them depending on the circumstance. You know,
that's kind of cool. Like if it was in close range or something, it would become a penalty.
Yeah.
I do like that. That's actually really cool.
Like if somebody's using a spear, but their opponent is outside of that effective range, then that range bonus for the spear ends up flipping on them.
I really like that. That's really like an elegant representation too.
Yeah, I'm not saying that's gonna work universally, and the Dark Eye is a game that is using some degree of map combat. So depending on how one is handling combat, it's not going to be as easy of a fix.
Mm-hmm.
But
it's true.
But the option is still there. And what I see out of this, especially with table 310 in the demo, is a kind of rock paper scissors approach. Or if I want to go a step further, something akin to Pokemon types, just with the whole bullshit. Looking at you, psychics in Gen 1. No, I'm never letting that go. But in addition to that, it looks like you also have a supporter system, which, would it be fair to say that supporters would be akin to, say, the followers or minions in some games that you end up getting, you know, where you're at a certain threshold and you get underlings?
Yes, yep, that's very much the idea. It was meant to be kind of the NPC following that you build up anyway in games, but without all the bookkeeping. And so the idea behind it is that they are different types of supporters that really only do one thing. And so instead of having to manage 5 different NPCs that are all acting throughout the battle round, and you're keeping track of their health and their attacks and their items and everything, which can truly bog down whatever it is that you're doing, they all have a very specific role-playing, combat, or otherwise ability, and you can activate it based on whatever the type of NPC they are. And it's just a lot of fun because then you can build up a horde of followers and NPCs. You could be leading a whole caravan, going back to Ars Magica, which is actually a lot of inspiration for the ideas in Pen. But going back to their following a system where you would have like a whole caravan of support characters like cooks and squires and pages and everything. Yeah. Very narrative and very dynamic in terms of role playing, but less bookkeeping and mechanics. So that was kind of the experience that I wanted to capture while keeping it a fun and fast system.
Yeah, I can get that. And since Battles was also in that demo, I am curious if one thing that you've considered is how one might do a bit of crossover between the Pen RPG and the war game. Like if somebody wanted to bring elements from one to the other.
Yes. So I guess I have an answer to your question, but it's not very satisfying. I have thought about it. At the moment, there isn't any such consideration or inclusion in the manual. And that's just because as a role-playing game, it's very linear. You kind of progress in complexity through the modules, and it builds on itself really cleanly. But the Pen War game being its own whole system, segueing it in to that third module, I just really had a hard time because it just felt like a huge speed bump that you would hit to learn. So I guess I kind of leave that up to the players. You know, if you have both the Pen War game and the Pen role-playing game, which they're both available on our Kickstarter right now. War Game's available on our website also. And we're actually running a exclusive, a foil hardcover that is going to be a Pen compendium that includes both the war game and the role-playing game, also on our Kickstarter. And so if you get both of those and you want to segue them, or you write up war game units for your followers or for your armies, by all means, you know, it's a super easy, you know, leap over and you have a session of war game, and then the next session's back to role playing. But I just didn't find a way to segue into kind of the linear role playing progression, so I eventually just kind of had to give up on it.
Which is fair, and if I'm being honest, even the bigger pros have a hard time with that sort of cross conversion. I've talked with Graham Davis in the past, who is one of the original creators for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. He did say that early on they tried to do the same dice system that's in Warhammer Fantasy Battle, until they realized they wrote themselves into a corner with how they did it and had to blow the whole thing up.
Oh no!
There has been that. I would have liked to bring Kings of War into this conversation, but the Kings of War RPG conversion never fully finished, which is unfortunate. I've had some issues over the years with the RPG adaptations of BattleTech, namely that each one of them that I've played, as far as the official ones go, has some kind of catch. Like the Mech Warrior games have the same sins of some of those games that came out of the 80s and 90s that are hyper obsessed with complex realism. This was a problem around that time. It's the reason why Fantasy Games Unlimited and Palladium and the like are my whipping boys. Palladium for other than that, and why I've said I will not run Phoenix Command unless I'm paid an amount of money that you could not afford. That's hazard pay. And then the only war game I can think of the only war games I can think of that have made successful leaps into that sort of cross modularity. There's not a whole lot of pickings, just because a war game and a role playing game aren't gonna be the same energies.
Mm-hmm.
I will give Infinity
Exactly.
credit for the fact that they didn't even try to do that. They're like, no, we're using the 2D20 system. You guys are the player characters have a particular thing that they're built around. That's it. Specifically, that they're members of I think it was 013 was the name.
Ooh.
Basically a special task group within that setting. I like much, and you kind of had that with Warhammer 40,000 instead of doing you're just characters. No, each of the FFG games had a particular angle. Dark Heresy had it that you were acolytes of an Inquisitor. Death Watch had it that you were, members of the Death Watch. Rogue Trader had it that you were members of a Rogue Trader dynasty. Or at the very least, the members of a Rogue Trader ship. That's that sort of thing. Because when you're dealing with whole armies and then try and bring that to a personal level, there's a lot of options, and you need to narrow down that net.
And you're really creating different experiences, and it can be fun to alternate experiences. It can be an interesting mini game, basically. But when you're playing a role-playing game, you're playing because you want to be a character. And when you're playing a war game, it's because you want to be a general who's leading or orchestrating this, broad encounter. And so creating or merging those two experiences don't necessarily work to the benefit of each other, at least that I've seen.
Yeah, this isn't something that's limited to war games, because I've seen more than my fair share attempts at trying to do Magic the Gathering, for instance, in TTRPG form. And much like with BattleTech, each one I've seen has some sort of catch. I think the problem is the idea of playing as a planeswalker has that same issue of you're playing an army instead of playing a person.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think the only card game I can think of that successfully made that particular transition properly was Legend of the Five Rings. And that was because it was already built around characters as it was. That and building a character system just around the different clans. You don't really have the same problem. All the more so because instead of being some interdimensional magician, you're a samurai in Rokugan. You only have one setting you've got to work with instead of all of them.
Yeah, you have to narrow something. You have to focus somewhere.
You're no doubt familiar with the expression "eyes bigger than your stomach."
Oh yeah.
Yeah. But with that in mind, one of the other things that was brought up on the Kickstarter was the idea of standard items. Was this a way to try and streamline item management so it's not as granular? You're not dealing with how many 10-foot lengths of rope you've got?
Yes. Yup. It was designed to make, oddly enough, the mechanical side of items more narrative and the narrative part of gameplay more mechanical, to kind of act as a segue again for players who are just getting into role-playing. And nobody wants to count each bullet that they have, or each foot of rope that they have. And so we just bundle all of that into general gear. You get gear that you can spend, and you can call it a torch, you can call it a rope, you can call it bullets, whatever you need to call it. But then beyond that, there were other key kind of sticking points where I felt like role-playing should segue well into the mechanical side of things and vice versa. And so that's where we came up with these standard items, these maps, gear, food, clues, and feeling there's a fifth one that I'm forgetting.
Gear, loot, food, clues, maps.
Oh, loot. Yeah, that's the other one. So loot is your catch-all finance. If it just lends itself well to this kind of cross-setting system where whether you're playing with credits in Star Wars or playing with dollars in the modern day, loot is loot. You can just keep it as a generic buying and selling. But it also is a fun option where you can roll on a table and generate a random item too. So a DM, if they want to give you 6 loot for killing a dragon, then you might choose to keep 3 of it to buy stuff and just call it gold pieces or whatever, and then the other 3 you can roll for items and see if you maybe hit a really rare one or a normal one. And it just simplifies the bookkeeping, but it creates a really cool experience and kind of that sense of discovery. And then with maps, it's a way almost to fast travel somewhere. It's kind of gets around the idea of having to take these long journeys or adding in a journeying mechanic where if you dialogue with an NPC or you keep a supporter that can be your tracker, then they give you maps that you can find hidden locations or locations that are far away. And then clues are similar where they can reduce the difficulty of a certain encounter if you've dialogued with someone ahead of time. So like if you know that the prince has a weakness for, I don't know, bright light or something, or he's easily goaded into something, and you've talked with an NPC about it, for a new player, it might be difficult to work that role-playing information into a meaningful role-playing impact. And clues are just a nice way to do that, where you earn a clue by having that conversation, and then you cash the clue in to reduce the difficulty of the role or to give yourself a bonus when you're in that situation. So it was just a nice segue from storytelling to mechanics.
In a roundabout way, it reminds me of skills as resources in the gumshoe system.
I could see that.
Yeah, which that's obviously that system is most known for Trail of Cthulhu, which is currently crowdfunding its 2nd edition. I might be a little bit biased because the guys behind it have been in the temple earlier this month, but
oh, nice.
But that whole system was built by Kenneth largely to address the issues with skill systems in more investigative style play. Because the idea of rolling to see whether you can spot a clue or to see something came off odd to him, and I can understand why. Or the idea of role playing. Okay, you're looking around and you don't see this thing. Or you're trained in a certain field of expertise, like a field of science, but you have to roll to see if you can figure something out in a field that you've already studied.
Yeah, where you should have some guarantee there, or some floor to your experience.
Yeah. That and just the bloatedness when it comes to knowledge skills in some games where everything needs to have its own skill and it gets ridiculous.
Yeah.
But with all of that said, what are you shooting for as far as a page count? Like 100?
It clocks in at 92. Yep, so just short of 100. Yep. And the first 3 are all characters, so you're learning the system, your character creation, and your items, and then all of the open-ended systems of item crafting, supporters, battles, magic, and maneuvers. And then the last 2, the 4th module is your DMing, and then your 5th module is world building. So it kind of, depending on where it is that you're going to be serving, whether it's the game master or the character, that kind of tones down what it is you need to read to.
I do appreciate in the PDF there was bookmarks, and I'm assuming there's going to be bookmarks in the full thing.
Yep, there will. Yep. And it's true to page PDF, so if you look in the table of contents and it says something is on page 34, you can go right to page 34 of the PDF and it'll match up.
Yeah, I can certainly get that. But with that said, I do want to sincerely thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to come all the way to my temple and enjoy the madness that happens around here.
Oh, it is my pleasure. It's always great talking with you, and like I said, a lot of great ideas in our first conversation that was able to chew on these last 4 years. So it's always a pleasure talking with you, man, and hearing the new things that are going on in the industry.
And anytime you see fit to return, the door is always open. As I often say around here, drinking is not mandatory, but it is encouraged. And of course, a sincere thanks goes out to everyone who took the time out of their schedule to come onto the show and enjoy the madness. And there will be plenty more where that came from, as there always is here, on the open bar of the internet. But until then, on behalf of the good brothers present and not present, my name is Mildra, I am your gaming monk. Stay fucking frosty, everybody!